Rancher lived alone for years until a hang girl breathed in his arms. Best Wild West stories. Witness this unbelievable, true, inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. The Wyoming plains stretched wide and endless, a sea of waving grass and dust that shimmered beneath the harsh sun. It was a land where a man could disappear, swallowed whole by the silence, and where the only laws were survival and the pull of the gun. Ethan McGraw had chosen this land for that very reason. 15 years earlier, he had buried his wife and young son beneath a cottonwood tree, victims of a fever that swept across the frontier like wildfire. Since then, Ethan had been a shadow among men, his life reduced to tending cattle, mending fences, and riding across lonely fields that seemed to mock him with their emptiness. Neighbors in town spoke of him as if he were already gone, a ghost who lived in a weather-beaten cabin with no company but his horse and the coyotes that cried at night. He rarely rode into town except to trade supplies, and even then he kept his hat low and his words few. The saloon girls whispered stories about the sad-eyed rancher, some saying he once killed a dozen men in a border fight, others swearing he was cursed. Ethan never corrected them. Silence was his armor, and grief was the only companion that never betrayed him. On most days, he rose before dawn. He would light the stove, boil bitter coffee, and eat dry biscuits while the morning air chilled his bones. Then he rode out across his land, counting the cattle, fixing posts, always keeping his hands busy so his mind would not betray him with memories of laughter that once filled his home. Every evening ended the same, a single lamp glowing in his cabin window, a journal entry written in rough script, and the haunting quiet of a man with no one left to pray for him. But the frontier has a way of breaking patterns, of tearing apart the routines men cling to in order to keep themselves sane. That night began like any other, yet ended like none Ethan had known before. Storm clouds rolled over the horizon as he was checking his herd, the sky bruised purple and gray. The wind carried a scent of rain and danger, and his horse grew restless, tossing its head and snorting against the gathering storm. Ethan muttered to himself, tugging on the reins, but his eyes narrowed when he noticed something unusual near the line of oak trees that marked the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was the storm playing tricks. Shadows twisted and bent under the flash of lightning. But then another strike lit up the sky, and his breath caught. A figure dangled from the thick branch of an oak, swaying against the wind like a rag doll. Ethan spurred his horse forward, his heart hammering as the truth came into focus. It was a woman, young, too young to die this way. Her dress clung to her body, soaked by rain, and the rope around her neck creaked with each gust. Ethan slid from his saddle in a rush, his boots sinking into the wet earth. With a sharp pull of his knife, he cut the noose and caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was limp in his arms, her head falling against his shoulder. He muttered a curse under his breath, thinking he was too late. But then, just as lightning cracked the sky above them, her chest shuddered. A faint breath rattled past her lips. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a jolt of something he thought was long dead inside him. Hope. He carried her to his horse, lifting her as gently as if she were made of glass. With one arm, he held her steady across the saddle as he mounted. The storm beat down, rain stinging his face, but he pressed on, guiding his horse through the darkness until his cabin's faint outline appeared in the distance. Inside, he laid her near the fire, wrapping her in blankets. Her face was pale, her skin cold, yet her breathing, weak and shallow, proved she clung to life. Ethan worked quickly, feeding the fire until flames roared, warming the room. He poured water, dabbed her forehead with a cloth, and muttered quiet words he didn't realize he still remembered. Prayers half-whispered from a man who had long since abandoned church pews. As he worked, he studied her face. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her lips bore the mark of the rope, and bruises marred her skin. Whoever had strung her up had done so with hatred in their hearts. Yet there was also a fierce beauty about her, a stubborn spark even in her brokenness. Ethan shook his head, forcing the thought aside. She was a stranger, one dragged into his life by fate or perhaps by God himself. Though Ethan had stopped believing in divine mercy years ago, hours passed. The storm raging outside while inside the cabin, the girl clung to life. Ethan's eyes never left her. He fed the fire, checked her breathing, and waited. The loneliness he had lived with for so long felt different now. For the first time since his family's death, he was not alone. Just before dawn, when the storm finally eased, her eyelids fluttered. Ethan leaned closer, his breath held. Slowly, her eyes opened, glassy and filled with fear. She tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped her throat. Don't send me back." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of desperation. Ethan gently raised a cup of water to her lips, steadying her trembling hands as she drank. When she finished, he asked softly, "Who did this to you?" Her name was Clara Dawson, she told him, between gasps of air. Her father was a preacher in a small nearby town, a man known for strictness and fiery sermons. But Clara had never been like the other girls. She had a gift, a knowledge of herbs and remedies passed down from her grandmother. She used it to heal the sick and ease pain, but the townsfolk didn't see kindness in her work. They saw witchcraft. When a child nearly died of fever, and Clara saved him with her remedies, whispers turned to accusations. Superstition took hold, and fear turned the townsfolk cruel. They had dragged her from her home, tied the rope, and left her to die under the storm. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw tight. He had seen men use fear as a weapon before. He had seen mobs destroy lives to feel powerful. His heart burned with anger, but more than that, it burned with something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. This girl was alive because of him, and he would not let the world take her again. The cabin grew quiet as dawn broke, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. Clara drifted back to sleep, her chest rising steadily now. Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver as his eyes fixed on the door. He knew the town would come looking. They would not forgive her escape, nor would they forgive the man who saved her. But Ethan McGraw was no stranger to fights, and for the first time in years, he had someone worth fighting for. The morning sun rose slow and heavy over the plains, casting long shadows across Ethan McGraw's land. Inside the cabin, Clara Dawson stirred beneath the blankets, her breathing more steady than the night before. Ethan sat in his chair near the fire, a coffee cup cooling in his hand, and his revolver never more than an arm's reach away. He had not slept, but the weariness in his eyes was dulled by something stronger than exhaustion, a sense of duty, a protective instinct he thought had died long ago. He watched her shift in the firelight, her face still pale, but less ghostly now, her chest rising with the kind of rhythm that gave a man reason to hope. When she woke, her eyes darted nervously around the room until they found him. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, as if she expected to see a rope waiting or angry men at the door. But Ethan only gave a small nod, his expression unreadable, though his eyes carried a gentleness few had ever seen in him. "You're safe here," he said quietly, his voice gravelly from silence and long nights. Her lips trembled, and she swallowed before speaking. "They'll come. The townsfolk. They'll come for me." "I reckon they will," Ethan answered simply. He set his cup aside, leaning forward in his chair. "But they'll have to go through me first." Clara studied him, as though trying to understand why a man who owed her nothing would risk his life for her. In town, men helped for a price or turned away to save their own skins. But Ethan McGraw, the reclusive rancher no one trusted, had cut her down from the tree and brought her back to life. A lump rose in her throat, though she forced the tears back. She couldn't afford to break now, not when danger still pressed close. The next 2 days passed with a fragile peace. Clara regained her strength slowly, sipping broth, walking a little more each hour, and sitting by the fire wrapped in Ethan's old coat. She told him more of her story, how the townspeople, led by a group of zealots, had accused her of witchcraft. Her father, too weak to oppose them, had watched helplessly as they dragged her to the oak. Her voice cracked when she confessed that she had given up, that as the rope tightened, she thought death would be easier than the hatred she endured. Ethan listened in silence, jaw clenched, because he knew too well what it meant to lose everything to the cruelty of others. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains red, Ethan saddled his horse. "I need to head into town," he told her. Her eyes widened in panic. "No, if they see you, they'll know you helped me." "They'll know soon enough," he replied. "I can't keep you hidden forever, but I can get supplies, news, maybe find out how much trouble's coming our way." Clara wanted to protest, but something in his steady tones silenced her. He was not a man of many words, but every one of them carried weight. She watched as he rode away, her heart heavy with fear, not only for herself, but for the man who had become her only ally. The town of Dry Creek was alive with whispers when Ethan arrived. Men clustered outside the saloon, their talk sharp with anger. He overheard enough to know Clara's disappearance had shaken them. Some said the devil himself had spared her, others swore she had cursed the rope. A few argued that she was still hanging there, her spirit roaming at night. Fear made men foolish, and foolish men were dangerous. Inside the general store, Ethan gathered supplies: flour, beans, bullets. The shopkeeper, an old fellow named Briggs, narrowed his eyes. "You been out by them oaks lately, McGraw?" he asked. Ethan didn't flinch. "I ride where my cattle take me." Briggs leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Folks are saying that Dawson girl's ghost walks, if she's alive. Well, the preacher's men won't rest till she swings proper. You'd be wise to stay clear." Ethan paid without a word and left, but the tension in town told him enough. It wasn't just a handful of angry villagers anymore. They were preparing. That night, back at the cabin, Clara watched him unload supplies, her brow furrowed. "They'll come here," she whispered. "Yes," Ethan said flatly. "And we'll be ready." The days that followed turned into preparation. Ethan repaired the cabin shutters, checked the rifles, and stacked extra firewood inside. Clara helped where she could, though her body was still weak. She ground herbs, made poultices, and tended to small wounds Ethan had long ignored. Their lives fell into a rhythm, one born not of peace, but of shared survival. Slowly, a bond grew between them, unspoken yet undeniable. Ethan found himself listening when she spoke, watching the way her eyes lit when she described the prairie flowers her grandmother once showed her. Clara, in turn, saw the humanity behind his stoic exterior, the way his silence carried not coldness, but deep scars of loss. Then the day came when the sound of horses thundered across the plains. Clara was gathering water when she froze, her heart seizing as dust rose on the horizon. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, his gaze narrowing at the sight of a dozen riders approaching. At their head was Deacon Hale, a man known for his ruthless sermons and harsher actions. His voice had stirred the townsfolk into the frenzy that nearly killed Clara. He reined his horse at the edge of Ethan's land, calling out with the arrogance of one who believed God himself rode at his side. "McGraw, we're here for the girl. Hand her over, and we'll trouble you no more." Ethan stood tall on the porch, rifle resting easy in his arms. His voice cut through the air, calm and cold. "Ain't no girl here. And even if there was, she'd be safer facing rattlesnakes than you lot." Hale's face twisted with fury. "You dare stand against God's will? I stand against cowards who hang women in storms," Ethan shot back. The riders shifted uneasily. Some spat in the dirt, others gripped their guns tighter, but not all looked eager for blood. Hale, however, would not be denied. With a sharp gesture, he signaled his men forward. The first shots cracked through the air, splintering wood from Ethan's porch. Clara screamed and ducked inside, her heart hammering. Ethan returned fire with the precision of a man who had not forgotten his skill. One rider fell, another cursed as a bullet grazed his arm. The gunfight raged, thunder echoing not from the sky this time, but from iron and lead. Inside, Clara scrambled to the shelf where Ethan kept spare bullets. Her hands shook, but she carried them to him, her fear turning to resolve. She would not watch him die for her without standing beside him. The standoff dragged on into the evening until smoke choked the air and bodies lay scattered near the fence line. Hale, wounded but alive, retreated with the survivors, vowing vengeance. Ethan watched them ride off, blood dripping from a wound in his shoulder, his breath ragged. Clara rushed to his side, pressing a cloth against the injury. "You saved me again," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Ethan looked at her, his voice low but steady. "No, Clara, you gave me something worth saving." That night, as she tended his wound by the fire, Clara realized the truth. She was no longer the girl who had hung from a tree, waiting for death. She was alive because of him, and he, in turn, had found life again through her. Two broken souls bound by fate in a land that cared little for either. The plains outside were quiet once more, but the war was not over. Hale would return stronger and with more men. Yet as Ethan drifted into a restless sleep, his hand brushing against hers, Clara knew they would face it together. The lonely rancher, who had lived as a ghost for 15 years, had found his reason to fight again. And she, the girl who had been hanged, had found in him a protector, a companion, perhaps even something she dared not name yet. The West was a cruel place, filled with death, dust, and despair. But in that small cabin on the edge of Wyoming, hope flickered like the fire in the hearth, fragile, stubborn, and burning against the darkness.